So, GTA San Andreas is a pretty long game, especially by the standards of the 3D era of GTA. When including the game's opening sequence, it clocks in with a total of 101 playable story missions, more than any other in the entire series to date, and in those 101 missions, many crimes are committed. But how many? If you're new to the channel, in the original run of the show that launched this channel, there would be a known crimes section of each individual protagonist. In those sections, I had done a bit of off-camera math by going through each and every mission one at a time using just my memory and making an educated guess, if necessary, or a direct count if possible, of how many crimes were committed during each, and what those crimes were. I made a chart and everything, but what I did not do, for some dumb reason, is actually mark down what crimes were committed for each mission specifically. Instead, I just marked down the type of crime and the total number committed by that game's protagonist. So today, we're going to go through every single mission in San Andreas and determine what crimes our lovely player character, Carl C.J. Johnson, could be charged with based on my ignorant understanding of the law as a layperson and a YouTuber, which, as everyone knows, are the smartest people on Earth. Now, do keep in mind that the total we will arrive at the end will represent only the crimes committed by CJ during the main game, and will not account for the many random deaths which will occur during anybody's actual individual playthrough of the game. I'll only be counting for how many bad guys the game spawns in, and all of those having to be killed, and not the potential pedestrians that CJ strikes just driving to a mission or escaping the cops. Right, the cops. That's another variable, since depending on how long a player takes to evade the police during certain missions can lead to more or worse charges. So, when a wanted level is given because of necessary player action, we will count that as evading/resisting arrest, and or fleeing the authorities without accounting for the possible deaths during the hypothetical chase. So, our very first mission, technically speaking, is in the beginning, and the only thing the player actually has the opportunity to do in this mission is ride their bike back to Grove Street. There is certainly the potential for a gang fight here, which is explicitly used as a threat when the Crash officers dump CJ here in rival gang territory, but in my own experience, rarely does anything actually interesting happen here, and anything that could or would is entirely down to the roll of the dice, and thus cannot be counted. So that's one mission with 0 crimes, on to the next. Which is technically just a cutscene, the mission Big Smoke that introduces us to, well, Big Smoke. Which, again, technically means that there are no crimes committed here, since all that happens is CJ enters his house, meets Smoke, and then they drive to CJ's mother's funeral. Our next mission is the sort of real first mission, where CJ is actually asked to do something rather challenging, and that is, escape the Ballas cars, and follow Sweet and later Ryder and Big Smoke. Now, since the game never asks the player to fight these Ballas, even though sometimes I certainly do, nothing here really counts. It's arguable that CJ could be guilty of reckless driving, even though he is on a bike, since the player will be necessarily ignoring traffic laws. But given the circumstances of his life being in danger, I think he would have a good argument for acting in self-defense. Or however that would actually work in this case. A lot of this is up in the air, so I think I'm going to give this one another pass. It's certainly the Ballas of this mission who would be the targets of law enforcement, but sadly, in real life, depending on the officer and the time of day and how they're feeling at that particular moment, they could just as easily have charged both the Ballas for their attempted murder and the Grove Street Boys with reckless or what have you. For the sake of simplicity with this one, though, I'm going to mark it down as no crimes, though. The next mission, on the other hand, is quite different. The mission Ryder sees Carl going with the eponymous gangster to get a haircut, which is perfectly legal, and then rob a pizza store, which isn't. However, it isn't CJ who actually robs the store, it's Ryder. CJ does then flee with Ryder and does help Ryder to escape, though, which would at the very least give him accessory to an attempted armed robbery, at the worst, I would think. So that's our first real charge for CJ since arriving back in San Andreas, and the first the player is technically guilty of. Next up is tagging up turf, in which CJ has to spray Grove Street graffiti tags over top of rival gang tags in other neighborhoods. Well, I have to think that each instance of spraying a tag would be a vandalism charge, but the first tag CJ doesn't spray. Sweet does. So for starters, that's 1 accessory to vandalism, and then in the first section of the mission, 2 additional vandalism charges. In the second section, we have 3 more tags, and thus 3 more charges, but also, we have CJ's first encounter with enemies that the game tells us to eliminate. Except, wait a minute, it doesn't actually tell us explicitly to kill these guys. It's heavily implied that you should, since they're blocking one of the tags you need to get for the mission, but it is entirely possible to spray the tag and run away. So for something like this, I am not going to count these 2 potential murders. Only when the game tells us we have to kill enemies to proceed do the deaths actually count. If the mission objectives, that is, the text at the bottom of the screen, doesn't tell you to do something, it doesn't count. That being said, I'm going to start keeping track of moments like this and look at 2 possible totals in the end. The high estimate with deaths like these included, and the low estimate with the lowest possible number of crimes committed. Future criminal historian here, and just a warning that the high count ends up being basically the same as the low count, or not really worth distinguishing between, so yeah. Unless the enemy being killed really requires the player to go out of their way, I'm probably gonna count it. Back to the video. Our next mission is cleaning the hood, and our first charge comes with the mission's second objective, which is to beat up a crack dealer selling to Grove Street gangsters in Grove territory. CJ is expected to kill him, but it's also not expected that the player has a gun at this point, even if they do, so we're going to have 1 assault charge and 1 murder charge. Afterwards, the player has to kill several ballas in a crack den nearby, but only 2 need to be killed to proceed, even though several more can be killed. I don't include those as part of the high total because they're completely unnecessary, and you do have to go completely out of your way, so. The mission Drive-Thru starts innocently enough with the gang ordering food at Cluck and Bell,
I'll have 2 number 9s.
But afterwards, a ballast car shows up and the gang starts shooting. There are 2 gangsters in the car that we have to destroy, meaning at bare minimum, this mission would give CJ 2 accessory murder charges, if the ballast car is destroyed and the attackers killed with 0 collateral damage. There would also likely be a reckless driving charge, so we'll add that too for the threat posed to the public. The only thing illegal that CJ does in the next mission, 9s and AKs, is purchase unregistered firearms from Emmett. Granted, he doesn't actually pay for them, so maybe not purchase of illegal firearms, but instead simply possession of illegal firearms. Well, Drive-Thru had a bunch of accessory murder charges, and Drive-By is no different, just much worse. Sure, CJ can help take down ballas by running them over, but what the game explicitly asks us to do is drive so that the rest of the boys can get the kills. So that's precisely what CJ does. In total, there are 16 kills too, so that's 16 additional accessory murder charges. And of course, more reckless driving. In the mission Sweet's Girl, CJ is forced to rescue Sweet and the eponymous girl he's with, and that explicitly requires the murder of 5 Seville Boulevard family's gangsters. More reckless driving when escaping the remaining gangsters by car, but none of them have to be killed. Each car with 4 additional enemies, though, could be added for an additional 8 kills, and it wouldn't be too much of a stretch seeing as they posed a very real threat. Now, I'm sure some racist cop somewhere could and probably would charge CJ and all the Aztecas gangsters participating in the lowrider competition, but I don't actually think they're breaking any laws. I suppose they do bet money on it, which would make it illegal gambling, so 1 charge of that for CJ, but that's the only thing I can think of. Moving on to some Big Smoke missions. First up, we have the mission OG Loke, which introduces us to the eponymous character. Starts off legal enough with CJ Smoke and Sweet picking up Loke from the police station downtown, but then we have to go with Loke to murder the guy who assaulted him in prison. So, during this long-ass chase, the whole time Loke is firing his gun at Freddy, so we have a reckless driving charge and accessory to illegal discharge of a firearm in public, or something like that. At the end, we have to kill Freddy and his friends too, for a total of 4 murder charges as well. The next mission, Running Dog, for Big Smoke, is literally a drug deal, or it's supposed to be more of a drug steal, but eventually Smoke makes things violent.
Yeah, motherfucking Big Smoke. Remember that name.
Well, since CJ didn't try to stop him, and in fact encouraged him, this would be an accessory assault charge for Carl, and then afterwards, during the chase, there's the murder charge because you have to kill this guy, plus 2 more potential murder charges in these 2 Vagos gangsters who shoot at you as the target flees. Everyone's favorite mission, Wrong Side of the Tracks, was a little trickier to pinpoint. For one thing, the dirt bike, which magically appears, can't have been left there by either Smoke or CJ, especially since neither knew exactly what would happen, so that could be our first actual charge of Grand Theft Auto. Then Carl drives while Smoke kills 4 Vagos on top of the train, so that's pretty easy, 4 accessory murder charges. Then I suppose also tack on reckless driving, and I think that about does it. Big Smoke's final mission, Just Business, is the first one with a truly ridiculous death toll. In this mission, CJ accompanies Smoke to an illegal business deal, but I'm not actually sure what charge, if any, could be given here for attending the deal alone. However, only seconds into that deal, things turn violent, and it becomes an on-rail shooter section, with Smoke driving a motorcycle and CJ taking out all the enemies who pursue them. Now, during this chase, I counted 60 murder charges, although actually that also includes some of the murders from the first section, but there's also a few who either have the ability to survive the chase, or were hard to keep track of, like those in the cars, so it's probably more like 64, but we'll stick with 60 for now. Then we would also have our first accessory to reckless driving charge, since it isn't CJ doing the driving for once. Our first solo rider mission, Home Invasion, doesn't have any violence, but we do have to rob an old Vietnam War vet of several crates full of guns. Now, even if these are old guns, they're going to be worth a decent amount of money, which would make this one charge of grand theft if the mission as a whole is considered, plus obviously a charge of breaking and entering. I'm not sure if it would stack charges based on the value of the goods they stole or whatever, but they were definitely worth more than $950, which is the threshold in California for a grand theft charge versus a petty theft one. They also stole guns, which means an additional charge of grand theft of a firearm, multiplied presumably by the number of guns they stole, which, based on the size of the crates being loaded, was probably a lot. We'll go with just 3 charges per crate though, or 1 charge per crate for a total of 3, with 3 being the bare minimum needed to finish the mission. So 1 charge of grand theft and 3 charges of grand theft of a firearm. The next Ryder mission, Catalyst, sees CJ and Ryder robbing a train full of more guns, but they also have to fight off some Vagos and Ballas to claim them as their own. So that's 8 murder charges between the 2 gangs we have to take out. Then 10 charges of grand theft of a firearm for each crate CJ throws to Ryder, even though realistically each crate would probably have more than 1 single gun. An accessory reckless driving charge for while the homies are driving, and then an actual reckless driving charge when CJ drives home. They also have to use a pay and spray on the way home, which would be an evading arrest charge. The third and final Ryder mission, Robbing Uncle Sam, sees us doing just that, by robbing a National Guard depot at the ocean docks. In order to do so, CJ has to kill at least 5 National Guard soldiers, so 5 murder charges, plus destruction of government property times 2 when destroying the terminals which lock the compound gates. Then 6 charges of grand theft of a firearm for each crate stolen. While loading up the crates, you're pretty much guaranteed to see at least 2 more soldiers show up to harass Ryder. You can get out of the forklift and kill them yourself, but it makes more sense to let Ryder handle them himself, so that'll be 2 accessory murder charges. On the way to the lockup, there are 2 Hummers, each with 2 more National Guard soldiers in them, so if you decide to take them out, that's an additional 4 accessory murder charges, since technically it's Ryder doing the killing. Oh, and of course, reckless driving. The next mission, the only one for Cesar Villalpando in Los Santos, High Stakes, Low Rider, is pretty simple. It's just an illegal street race, so reckless driving for sure, and street racing. Simple. Next. In the first OG Loc mission, Life's a Beach, Carl has to steal a sound system from a group having a beach party. So that's Grand Theft Auto for the theft of the actual van, and then regular Grand Theft for the actual sound system, assuming it was worth more than $950, which, if the party is any good, it damn well better be. I suppose it could be just a petty theft charge too, though, so I don't know. OG Loke's most infamous mission, Mad Dog's Rhymes, sees Carl breaking and entering into the eponymous rapper's Vinewood Hills mansion, and then murdering several of his guards in order to obtain the rhyme book. I count 10 murders, but technically speaking you could make it through without killing all of them, but it feels very out of your way to do so, so I'm just going to count them all. So, B&D, murder times 10, and petty theft, though arguably the actual rhyme book's value would exceed $950 just because of who it belonged to, which would graduate it to a grand theft charge. Next up, we have management issues, wherein CJ agrees for some reason to murder Mad Dog's manager, Alan Crawford, because he's preventing Loke from getting into the local music business. Well, for starters, CJ has to rob one of the real chauffeurs of their cars, and luckily this is before everyone had cell phones. So that's one Grand Theft Auto. Then, when actually taking Alan and his poor girlfriend hostage, we have 2 charges of kidnapping, followed by 2 gruesome murder charges. One of the most brutal moments in the game, in my opinion. Oh, we also have reckless driving as usual, and there would be some charge for dumping the car into the water, I'm sure, but I have no idea what it would be. Pollution? Actually, waste dumping. The final OG Loke mission, House Party, starts out innocently and legal enough, with the eponymous celebration of Loke's first album coming out. However, unsurprisingly, things don't stay legal when a bunch of ballas show up to crash the party. I counted 24 counts of murder to be added to CJ's growing total. The first mission, done directly for Tenpenny and Pulaski, Burning Desire, sees CJ using Molotov cocktails to light an apartment building on fire to kill some Vago. Before actually entering the building, though, we have at least 5 gangsters outside to kill for 5 murder charges, then 1 charge of arson for lighting the building on fire. Unfortunately for Carl, saving a woman from the building he just lit on fire himself does not count in his favor. Sorry, bud. However, it does appear that many other people died in the fire, so I'm going to estimate it at 15 more people, but technically they weren't murders. They were all manslaughters as part of the arson, or I suppose, negligent homicide. Yeah, let's go with that. And then 1 more murder to bring it up to 6, since out of the people who presumably died inside the building, 1 is the dude that Carl actually was supposed to kill. The only other crash mission in this part of the game, Grey Imports, has CJ infiltrate a Russian compound down by the docks, and take out numerous Russian baddies, including a main target, the head of the arms-dealing organization, for a total of 29 murder charges. This mission, though, also presents a bit of a paradox, since it has a section that can be completely skipped, and I always do skip it by simply being fast enough. If you let the Russian arms dealer make it to his car, then there is supposed to be a car chase after the murder spree inside the warehouse. So we would have a reckless driving charge on top of the 29 murders, but we can also tack on a breaking and entering, to be honest, since this was presumably private property. Oh, so actually, we'll just say trespassing. The sweet mission, Doberman, is the first mission which simply sees us taking over some territory in Los Santos for Grove Street, specifically Glen Park. Well, I count a total of 16 murder charges, 3 to get the gang fight going, then 4 for each wave of the fight, and then 1 more for the former Grove Street member who defected to the Ballas, or the Snitch, whom CJ kills at the end. The mission Los Sepulcros involves CJ, Sweet, and some Grove boys that we recruit, attacking the funeral of some other important Ballas gangster that we probably killed during some other, unspecified mission. During the chaos, we have to take out 7 Ballas, plus the target dude, a guy named Kane. Now, during my most recent run, I almost got 2 stars during the fighting, but I don't think that's guaranteed, so I won't add an evading arrest or a reckless driving charge onto here, but they could be pretty easily added. Now, the penultimate mission in Los Santos is reuniting the families, and holy crap is there a lot that happens here. CJ, Sweet, Ryder, and Smoke head to the Jefferson Motel, where Sweet is supposed to meet with the other heads of the segmented Grove Street sets, in an effort to reunite them, just like it says in the mission title. But things turn sour when the cops show up, and instead we have to cut through dozens of cops to reach Sweet trapped inside the motel. Now, the cops immediately outside, once you're given control, don't need to be killed, so I skipped them. But once inside, I start counting. From the inside of the motel to the end of the car chase, I counted 53 murders, plus the likely accidental death of the truck driver during the ending cutscene, and quite possibly the car behind it. Then there's all the property damage caused by the chase. The destruction of the tanker truck, which was probably full of gas, if it exploded that easily, and if that was the case, well, that truck would have been worth a lot of money, so... Plus, the destruction of at least one police helicopter and dozens of their cruisers, and killing many more officers. So I'm going to say 53 murders, 13 counts of destruction of police property, for the 12 cop cars and 1 cop helicopter, and accessory to reckless driving, as well as accessory to manslaughter for the death of the truck driver. Although that one is perhaps a stretch, so I guess I'll add it to the high count. The final mission in Los Santos, for now anyways, is a lot easier to count. CJ meets with Caesar and learns that both Smoke and Ryder are traitors, and then it's off to the Mullahand intersection for a straight gang fight, with a total of 20 murder charges. Oh, and also, just as an aside, Definitive Edition? What the hell is this garbage? Our first mission in the countryside section of the game is rather simple. CJ has to drive a bit up Mount Chiliad and find a man being guarded by the FBI. The man is meant to testify against Tenpenny and Pulaski soon, and so, on their orders, he needs to die before that can happen. So that's a simple 5 murder charges for this mission, for the leaker and his 4 FBI guards. Well, our first real mission thread in the countryside begins with the Catalina robbery missions. And the first of those that I always do is, of course, Tanker Commander. In this one, CJ and Catalina rob a gas station of their tanker truck. Now, realistically, this truck would probably just belong to the truck company or whatever and not the actual gas station, but whatever. We're going to give a charge of Grand Theft Auto for the actual rig, and then a charge of grand theft for the contents of the tanker, which were presumably gas, which would be worth quite a bit, as I mentioned earlier, with the destruction of one in reuniting the families. Now, the 2 employees who pursue you can be killed, but it isn't necessary. They do destroy a gas station if you let them live, but that's not something I think Carl would be charged for, but instead they would be. One of my favorite missions, and our first for the truth, Body Harvest, is oddly enough not nearly as much of an actual body harvest as you might think. Or I suppose it doesn't have to be. It's relatively easy, and maybe even quicker, to run into the farm on a bike or something, don't kill anyone except the guy driving the combine harvester, then leave and return it to Truth's farm, which would only give CJ a Grand Theft Auto charge, and 1 murder charge plus trespassing. However, let's be realistic. Most people are going to probably kill at least the rednecks on the road, which is about 16 murder charges on the low. But if you take out everyone on the farm, including in the fields, it comes to like 22. Technically, the next mission was King in Exile, but it's just a cutscene back at the trailer in Angel Pine, so no crimes are committed. Instead, the actual next mission is the next Catalina robbery, which is Local Liquor Store, in which Catalina and CJ rob another group of robbers of their take, from a local liquor store in nearby Blueberry. Now, the thing here which is hard to determine is whether you, the player, and hence CJ or Catalina, kills each of the cowboys. It's probably more likely at this point in the game that you let Catalina kill them, so I'm going to mark down 4 accessory murder charges, plus a grand theft charge, since CJ's take, presumably half or less than half, was $1,000, and thus well over the threshold in California, and therefore presumably San Andreas law. But technically no robbery charges, since they didn't actually rob anyone besides other robbers. I'm not sure if they would still get the robbery charge. Now that I'm thinking about it, probably, so I will tack that on here as well. The next Catalina mission is Against All Odds, and sees CJ and Catalina robbing a betting shop in Montgomery. Now, Catalina kills 2 people at the front counter, so that's 2 accessory murder charges. Then, at least in my playthrough, the bomb that CJ sets off to open the door kills at least 1 civilian, so that's a murder charge. Then the take is once again enough to warrant a grand theft charge, and since the cops actually knew it was us this time, an evading arrest charge too. And this time they actually robbed the place themselves, so we've got to have an armed robbery charge, don't forget. And the final Catalina robbery mission is Small Town Bank, where the pair have to rob a bank in Palomino Creek. So we definitely get the armed robbery charge, and then when CJ fails to keep the crowd in check, we have at least 1 murder charge. During the shootout through the alley, I counted 10 more cop deaths, so that brings us up to 11, and then the pair steal 2 police bikes and escape. Now, one of the bikes is eventually lost when Catalina gets pinned by the cops, but the other presumably remains ours, so that'd be a charge of grand theft for the take, and grand theft auto for the motorbike, plus 11 murders, and since Catalina is likely to kill at least a couple officers, and this other guy dies chasing us, I'll also tack on 2 accessory murders, and 1 for manslaughter. Now, the next 2 missions are identical. They're both a point-to-point race in the countryside, and the only difference is that in the first race, you get a choice of whatever car you choose, and in the second you use a pre-selected car, and also the course is now in reverse. Now, while technically most of this race takes place out in the countryside, I'm pretty sure the local sheriff's office would still be considering this illegal street racing, so we'll add 2 more charges of street racing, and move on to the next one. The final mission in the countryside section of the game is for Truth. Are you going to San Fierro? And well, yes, as it happens, we are. But before we can go, we have to burn down a metric crap ton of premium quality weed so that Truth doesn't get arrested. Now, I don't actually know what, if any, charges could or would be laid for destruction of one's own property, but what that property is illegal drugs. Well, I'm not sure. I feel like Truth could still get an attempted distribution charge, and therefore Carl would get an accessory distribution charge, but honestly, the more egregious crime committed during this mission is Carl destroying the police helicopter, which presumably had at least 1 officer inside piloting it. So we'll say murder times 1, and destruction of police property times 1. But after that, it's a simple drive to San Fierro and nothing illegal. However, they are technically evading authorities here, so we'll add that as well. A huge thank you to all of my wonderful YouTube members and my patrons on patreon.com. And an extra special thank you to my executive producer tier patrons, Mason Collin, Chuck K45, and Die Castinator. Supporters at these tiers also have the option to promote a little bit of their own content, so this video is also brought to you by Mason Collins' podcast channel, We're About Everything, and Chuck K45's Upstart Farming channel, as well as Die Castinator's channel all about die-cast cars. YouTube members and patrons will get access to a second series of episodes on the Legend of Zelda series, so if you want to see those too, right now, be sure to sign up at any tier. You can already see the first of these exclusive episodes immediately. I release all videos a little early to all supporters, and give you any of the original music tracks created for a given video. You'll also get to see your name in the credits of all videos that are produced while you're pledged, get access to a small patron-only Discord server, where you can easily speak with me, or see little behind-the-scenes snippets, and most importantly, you'll receive my eternal gratitude. Seriously though, especially these days, those of you who support my work directly are absolutely incredible, and I can't properly express how grateful I am to all of you. Sign up today as a YouTube member, or get slightly better prices at patreon.com/thecriminalhistorian. And now, back to the video. The very first mission in San Fierro, Wear Flowers in Your Hair, doesn't actually have any crimes as far as I can tell. I mean, granted, the mission kinda sorta establishes that a lot of the Truth's hippie conspiracies are either completely true, or have some truth to them, and given that, the government probably would consider them stalking their super secret vans as illegal in some capacity, but for the sake of simplicity, this mission gets a pass. The next mission, 555 We Tip, sees CJ actually setting up somebody else to get taken down by the cops. But in order to do so, a poor innocent valet has to get murdered. Then Carl plants evidence, which is a new, unique charge, and he proceeds to call the police on the DA. Now, I'm sure that had Tenpenny actually been found guilty of this when he's eventually tried, then he would receive some pretty intense charges. But I wonder if CJ could perhaps be let off the hook due to being blackmailed into helping at the threat of his brother being hurt or killed in prison. CJ would probably still receive some charges if he chose not to assist the investigators, but they would certainly be lesser than whatever Tenpenny got. But for now, we'll stick with him getting a charge for the murder since he didn't need to do that. He simply felt it necessary and made a call, and then one charge of planting evidence as well. Deconstruction is one of the most brutal missions in terms of what actually takes place, but it only has 14 murders and then at least 5 charges of destruction of property or simply property damage. However, there is indeed a torture charge in California law, and I think this would indeed also warrant one of those for the manner in which CJ disposes of the construction foreman. He also brings the murders to 15, not 14. The first mission for Zero, Air Raid, seems like at first maybe it could be free of crimes, but nah. Come on, CJ fires thousands and thousands of rounds from an actual minigun at dozens of RC planes attacking this shop. Now, nobody is shown to have been explicitly hurt by any of this, but if it were real life, I almost guarantee somebody would have been. But as it happens, this is only GTA, and therefore I'll stick with property damage and illegal discharge of a firearm, to keep things simple. Everybody's favorite mission, Supply Lines, gets a murder charge for each courier that Carl hunts down with the RC Baron, as well as 1 property damage charged per car. I'm sure there could be other charges applied here, but I have no earthly idea what they would actually be. The next Zero mission, New Model Army, does not have any crimes. The first one like that, which isn't just a cutscene since the beginning of the game. And in fact, the next mission, Photo Opportunity, also doesn't have any crimes unless you stretch things a little bit. The only actual objectives are to drive to meet Caesar, then to Angel Pine, and then take photos of some other criminals in broad daylight in a public space. So yeah, no crimes committed here, other than Caesar leaving CJ and Angel Pine for no reason, which always pisses me off. The mission Jizzy, which introduces the eponymous character, is full of crime though, starting with at least 1 charge of pimping when dropping off one of the girls at a priest, then 3 murders, 1 for the pimp in Hashbury, and 2 more for the guys who are beating up another girl under the freeway. Then finally, we have 3 more murders and property damage, with CJ killing the priest, the girl he dropped off earlier, and the driver all in one go. T-Bone Mendez, the mission, not the actual guy, is another mission which is pretty easily completed with minimal crime, which is something I actually completely forgot about. See, when chasing down the bikes around the city, you can just snatch the packages when close enough to them, rather than killing them and picking them up. This is actually faster too, go figure. But CJ would definitely still need at least a reckless driving charge in order to get it done. Then again, now that I think about it, what CJ is collecting is packages of drugs, so actually he would be charged with possession for each package he grabs, which means a total of 4 possession charges. Oh, and actually accessory to distribution of narcotics. Sorry, Carl. Mike Torino, again the mission, not the man, is next. Here, CJ goes with T-Bone to find Mike, and eventually has to kill 6 people to rescue him, and then destroy some property on some property, which they are trespassing on. So 6 murders, property damage, trespassing, and evading authorities afterwards. Outrider is a mission which literally gives the player a rocket launcher, and also incidentally turns off the cops, so you know it's going to be pretty violent. It's actually not all that bad considering where the bar has already been set. It has just 18 murders and 12 property damage charges, as well as an uncountable number of discharges of a firearm in public. So many, in fact, that we actually won't count them. Oh, and also another accessory to the distribution of narcotics charge for helping the vans reach their destination. The first mission in Woozy's thread, Mountain Cloud Boys, involves killing a whole bunch of rival gangsters in the alleys for a total of 18 murder charges, and then an additional 4 accessory murder charges when letting Woozy kill the remaining 4 as the game instructs. This would also be 4 accessory property damage charges, I would say. The next mission for the Mountain Cloud Boys is Ran Fa Li, and here CJ has to take a car from the underground car park at the airport and then simply deliver it to a dock on the other side of town. The catch is that a bunch of the Da Nang boys start attacking you once you get inside the car, and set up a few unavoidable roadblocks. Now you could very easily just complete the mission without killing anyone, but it's too much extra work, so I'm going to include the guy at the initial ambush, this guy further along the road, and one of the guys near this truck, for a total of 3 guaranteed or 3 more possible, if for some reason the player decides to go out of their way and track down and kill the other squads. So we have 3 murder charges, and a reckless driving charge. But since we don't actually know what's inside the car, that's all we can give this mission for certain. Next up we have Lure, which surprisingly is yet another one that can be completed pretty easily without committing any crimes, besides reckless driving during the sections on the highway. I myself did kill some of them during my run for this video, but most of the time I complete it without killing any of them, and thus we have another in the San Fierro section which is technically clean. Amphibious Assault is a mission which explicitly asks for stealth, and therefore a minimal amount of death and or destruction. So we have to kill at least 5 dudes on board the ship in order to plant the bug, but really that's it. If you're feeling particularly violent, you could kill the other 2 baddies on board, and maybe even all the boats too. That would bring the total high up to 19, 7 on the ship and 12 on the patrol boats around it. Climbing on board the ship would likely also warrant a trespassing charge, so we'll add that too. The final Woozy/Mountain Cloud Boys mission in Fierro is the Da Nang Thang, and similar to the last one, involves CJ going out to a boat in the bay around the city. This time though, we also have an action movie helicopter minigun scene first, where Carl kills 5 baddies. And then on board, including the captain, 25 more murders were necessary to free the refugees on the bottom deck, and then escape the ship. So this one would again warrant a trespassing, plus the 30 total murder charges. The crash mission Snail Trail is very simple, just 2 murder charges for the reporter that you have to kill, and the person that he's meeting, another person threatening to leak information on Tenpenny's corruption. Despite the name, the mission Ice Cold Killa is tame in its body count compared to many others. CJ has to infiltrate the Pleasure Dome's club and kill Jizzy. In that process, any number of his guards can be killed, but the total that makes the most sense for me is 6, since it's very easy to trigger the cutscene once you're indoors, and then there are about 6 in your way on your way out the door. The guy in the car with Jizzy also just runs when the car catches fire and doesn't need to be killed. Oh, and I suppose also property damage charge here for destroying Jizzy's car, and possibly some other stuff in the explosion. One of the big ending missions for this section of the game, Pier 69, is a pretty straightforward affair. CJ and Caesar attack the eponymous pier, and Carl kills a total of 19 baddies between the Ballas and the San Fierro Rifa. At the end, we also kill both T-Bone and Ryder, plus CJ steals a boat, so Grand Theft... boat. Aqua? And murder times 21. Torino's last flight is also simple, with CJ taking out about 5 baddies on the ground, plus the presumably 4 in the chopper. We can for sure see 3, but I assume that Torino had a body double or something to stand in for himself. It just seems his style. Something that's harder to classify is what CJ's charge would, could, or should be for destroying a helicopter in public, more than likely above the highway. In our old GTA biography episodes, we would have given him a charge of terrorism. However, unsurprisingly, there isn't actually such a charge which can be levied under California law. Not that I could find. I'm sure plenty of other things could be charged though, like property damage and, depending on the outcome, negligent homicide even perhaps. For now, though, we'll stick with a few property damage charges and 9 total murder charges. You know what? I don't care if I can't find the official charge. I'm adding a terrorism charge because I don't know how else to account for things that cross this certain line. If we heard about something going down like this in real life, we'd probably see this word thrown around quite a lot, so we're going to use it as a means of representing truly egregious actions that put substantial amounts of civilians in very real danger. So, 1 terrorism charge for Mr. C to the J. Sorry, sir. And it's perhaps a good thing that I've introduced that precedent because in the very next mission, CJ is also doing something which would be seen in a very similar light. Now, granted, he's destroying a crack factory for misplaced but arguably good reasons, but given the size of Fierro in the game and the proximity of the factory to places where people definitely live, well, this probably wouldn't be seen as an act of benevolence. Robin Hood is taking from the drug lords to give to himself, really. Oh, and also at least 18 murders during his raid on the factory, and we'll say 10 property damage charges since we aren't figuring out the actual amounts of damage being done to the property itself and the surrounding ones. So, murder times 18, terrorism times 1, and property damage times 10. The first of the garage asset missions, Zeroing In, sees CJ needing to perform a very specific crash into this stupid NPC's car in order to force them out. Sorry, if I sound a bit bitter, it's because I spent a ridiculous amount of time in this run completing this mission. I blame the Definitive Edition, but I can't remember if it was actually any easier or less frustrating in the original. Anyways, only crimes here are the 1 charge of reckless driving and 1 charge of Grand Theft Auto. Actually, it's the exact same for the next mission, Test Drive, reckless driving in Grand Theft Auto for stealing a car from the showroom downtown and then driving it back to the shop. Oh, and also evading arrest. Customs Fast Track, however, is a little bit harder to classify. Most of it is pretty simple. Grand Theft Auto for sure, murder times 6 for the dudes who come after you at the docks. But what about using the dock crane? Like, what would the charge be? Illegally operating heavy machinery? I have no idea, but there would be something. I suppose trespassing might cover it since they're definitely not supposed to be here. Plus, property damage for opening the crates of the other cars and swinging them all over the place. We'll stick with that, but yeah, some of these are harder to sort than others, given what you do sometimes. But puncture wounds brings us right back to the usual for the garage missions, with it being nice and simple. Grand Theft Auto and reckless driving. I'm sure there could be some kind of specific charge for dropping tire spikes onto the road, but I have no idea what it would be in the moment, so I'll have to skip it. The first mission in the desert, Monster, is ironically quite tame, with only really a reckless driving charge for the parts where CJ is literally driving backwards on the freeway. The mission Hijack has CJ and Caesar working together again, this time to hijack a truck driving down the San Fierro freeway. So Caesar definitely kills the guy driving the truck, so that's an accessory murder. And then we also steal the truck ourselves, even though technically it's Caesar that does the theft part of this Grand Theft Auto. Then also a reckless driving charge, of course, and a regular old Grand Theft for the contents of the tanker stolen. Interdiction is another one that's a bit hard to pin down exactly what all the charges would be. CJ destroys at least 5 government helicopters, including all 5 agents aboard each one, out in the middle of the desert. So 5 kills per chopper for a total of 25 murder charges, plus 5 property damages for each chopper. But beyond that, I'm not sure what he would get. Real-world law just sometimes isn't prepared for the nonsense that GTA protagonists can get up to. The next missions, technically the next 2, have no crimes though. Or I guess it depends on how you look at it, and also we don't have all the information that we need to properly determine it. See, technically next is Verdant Meadows, where all Carl does is purchase an abandoned airfield. No crimes there, but then he has to learn how to fly and everything seems on the up and up until we get to the helicopter training mission. My question is, who is driving these trucks? Clearly somebody, and whoever that somebody is, or should I say was, is very dead. So that's at least 2 murders while flying, and also property damage for all the trucks, a total of 5. NOE also doesn't have any crimes, as all CJ does is fly his plane from one end of the state to the other. Then again, he does fly really low, which would probably be like reckless, flying? But unsurprisingly, it's not a common enough occurrence for somebody to go joy flying that they needed to have a specific charge for it. You know what? Fuck it. I'm giving it to CJ anyways. Reckless flying. Stowaway, though, is less easy to pin down, as the 4 murders that CJ commits on board the plane are easy enough. But what happens to the plane wreckage afterwards? Well, that's another matter entirely. I'm just gonna go ahead and give him another terrorism charge. Sorry, Carl. Black Project, the Truth's first mission in the desert, is... well, it's literally breaking into the GTA universe's equivalent to Area 51. Area 69, of course. And, well, I have no idea how to classify that because if it's ever been successfully done in real life, we don't know about it because they probably died shortly after accomplishing it. So, once again, unsurprisingly, California law didn't have a specific charge for this. So we're gonna go with trespassing on restricted government property, plus, 45 murders, and this time we actually do know the value of what CJ steals, a $60 million jetpack, which is about $134 million in 2024 money. Either way, it's a hell of a lot of money, and by far one of the most valuable things ever stolen by a GTA protagonist across the whole series. Also though, only $60 million? Really? And the next and final truth mission, Green Goo, arguably could rival even the jetpack in terms of value, only we have absolutely no idea what the hell the Green Goo itself actually is. Anyways, this mission sees CJ stealing said goo off of a train using the jetpack from the last mission. 8 total murders for the soldiers aboard the train, and then property damage for sure plus grand theft for the stealing of the actual eponymous goo. Alright, and on to Las Venturas with the first triad mission, Fender Ketchup, in which Carl drives a car around the city with Johnny Sindaco tied to the front, in an effort to get him to reveal who he is and who he works for. So ideally, this mission is easy. Reckless driving, torture definitely, and evading arrest, but that's about it. Explosive Situation is surprisingly tame, given its name. CJ has to trespass onto a private quarry, and then steals 4 sticks of dynamite for 4 charges of grand theft. Then about 5 murders, though it could be done without killing anyone if you really wanted to. Oh, and finally a grand theft auto charge for stealing the bike that you need to use to escape the quarry. You've Had Your Chips is a more explosive situation, to be honest, with 16 murders minimum as CJ attacks a Sindaco family plastics factory. And also trespassing, and 9 charges of property damage for each fake chip machine that Carl destroys. Don Peyote is super simple. Carl drives out to the desert and picks up Kent Paul and Macker, and in the process has to kill 2 violent rednecks at a snake farm. Actually though, he has to kill all 4 because I discovered if you let the other 2 live during the farm encounter, they will actually approach you at the entrance to Caligula's, and the game forces you to deal with them. Never seen that before in my life, but yeah. 2 more murders. The first of the robbery missions, Architectural Espionage, is another one that's a little bit tricky. CJ trespasses to get the documents, but I'm not sure he would be charged with that per se. Property damage for sure for destroying the vents and then unintentional arson, although I think that would just be arson. As for actually taking the photo of the blueprints, I'm not sure what the charge would or could be. I suppose just theft would apply nicely, even though he's technically making a copy. Then 16 murders between the top floor and escaping out the front door. And finally evading arrest, since CJ will definitely have some stars by that point. Key to Her Heart is a mission that requires CJ to literally stalk a girl in order to kill her lover, and then replace him despite the 2 literally looking nothing alike. There is an implication that if CJ and Millie do continue to date, she eventually refers to him by his actual name, and not the old Gimp's name, so that means that Carl tells her. This is further implied by the fact that letting her live during the heist means she will ask for a cut after the fact, and Carl will always agree. Anyways, definitely a stalker charge for the mission itself, as well as murder for killing Benny, and identity theft, I guess, and, well, I'm sorry to say it, but also the R word. Carl sleeps with this woman on at least one occasion, with her apparently under the impression that he is another man. Now, again, the two look nothing alike, so maybe Millie realized it wasn't actually Benny, didn't care, and continued to see Carl, hence why she eventually learns his real identity. But yeah, no matter how you slice it, this is still really messed up. Like, really messed up. At the very least, I'm doing Carl's character the courtesy of not killing her to obtain the keycard, which is a lot more monstrous than just sleeping with her under false pretenses to obtain it, but it is still pretty monstrous. Dam and Blast has CJ parachuting onto the GTA universe's equivalent to the Hoover Dam, the Sherman Dam, and thus trespassing, infiltrating the structure and killing 5 guards in the process, and planting a bomb on each of the 4 generators. Now, this will become a full-on terrorism charge later, but for now it's what I'm going to call conspiracy to commit terrorism. It's like premeditated or whatever. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. Anyways, he also, though, gets a regular old terrorism charge and property damage for bailing out of a plane that he was flying and allowing the wreckage to rain down on the helpless citizens of San Andreas. Cop Wheels sees CJ getting his hands on 4 separate police bikes in a very frustrating way. Now, it is very possible to grab each of the bikes without killing the officer who owns it, but more than likely they're going to die, so for this one, I put down 4 Grand Theft Autos, 4 murders, and reckless driving plus evading arrest. Pretty simple. And the final heist setup mission, Up, Up, and Away, sees Carl infiltrating a government facility in the corner of the map and killing, in my case, 26 soldiers. So there's murder, plus trespassing, then Grand Theft Arrow. No, once again, it's technically not a real charge, but I'm including it, and also it's a little internal reference to the mission of the same name from GTA 3. Then Grand Theft Auto for using the helicrane to steal the bank truck and deliver it to the airplane graveyard. Intensive Care has CJ tracking down an ambulance with Johnny Sindacco in it, and then delivering him to their meat factory. Now, I do believe you can find Johnny on the first try here, but for the list, I'm going to assume that, like in my most recent attempt on this mission, he doesn't find Johnny until the last of the 3 ambulances. So for each of the others that he attacks, I'm going to put an extra reckless driving charge and a charge of attempted kidnapping since, that is what's happening. Then 2 murders for each of the Sindacco guards escorting Johnny, and actual kidnapping for taking Johnny even if he does deliver him to the meat factory, where he was presumably going anyways. Oh, and a Grand Theft Auto for the stolen ambulance. The meat business lives up to its name, of being a meat grinder of baddies inside an actual meat factory. I totaled 28 kills here, but I realized something while counting for this mission. All of these 28, in this instance at least, could arguably be considered self-defense. All 28 people that CJ kills here are indeed trying to kill him, and he didn't start it for once, so... But I'm actually going to put this down as 28 murders still, since CJ had no obligation to be here, and the reasons why he is here are less than benevolent, so yeah, still. Now, technically, the next one counts as a mission, Fish in a Barrel, but it's just a cutscene showing CJ officially becoming a partner in the Four Dragons Casino. Now, arguably, given this organization's organized crime activity, and CJ's own participation in it, he could be charged with something here, but on paper it's nothing, and so I'm not going to count it. And then, the mission Mad Dog is not only crime-free, but reversed? Well, it doesn't work like that, but CJ does actually save somebody's life in this mission. Never mind the fact that the reason the man he saves tries to off himself to begin with is because of what CJ did to him, but that's beside the fact. No crimes here. Free Fall is an interesting one. Now, CJ does actually have a pilot's license, so him getting into the airport isn't a big deal. He did that in missions before. But it does explicitly say that we are stealing this plane, so that's a Grand Theft Arrow. Then CJ ditches the plane over the ocean, which is definitely illegal. More waste dumping, according to California law. Then he hijacks a freaking plane. He doesn't do it for the reasons we normally associate with that word, so I won't give him another T charge here, but I will be giving him a hijacking charge and murder 5 for the occupants inside. The first crash mission in a while, Misappropriation, sees CJ being assigned to the task of saving Tenpenny and Pulaski once again by killing a whole team of federal investigators who have a dossier of evidence on Tenpenny and are meeting out in the desert. At the site, CJ kills all of the 9 agents plus the actual target with the dossier for a total murder count of 10, but also some property damage for the helicopter, which usually has to be destroyed. I also think this would warrant a tampering with evidence charge, since who knows what Tenpenny does with it after he hands it over to him. High Noon sees Carl finally getting a chance to strike back at Crash, first by killing Eddie Pulaski. Now, technically, he should get a reckless driving charge and a murder charge, but no, I refuse. No crimes were committed here. Moving on. Despite the elaborate nature of the next mission, St. Mark's Bistro, it isn't all that elaborate in terms of its crimes. Really, just 18 murders. I like how that sounds. That is the bar that Mr. C to the J has set. 18 murders is a just. Like, damn, dude. Anyways, moving on. Because now, though, it's on to one of the most elaborate missions in the game, and one of the clear inspirations for the heists in GTA 5, breaking the bank at Caligula's. In this mission, we actually pull off the heist that was set up over the course of 5 missions earlier. Now, it's hard to say who would be charged with what if all of this actually went down, but for starters, we have approximately 49 murder charges, a trespassing charge for CJ once he entered employee-only territory, disguised as a Caligula's employee, a full-on terrorism charge for when the dam explosives are blown, destroying those generators and presumably causing untold millions or even billions of dollars of damage to taxpayer-funded infrastructure, all just so that the lights would go out for a short while. Then, of course, there would be the many property damage charges. I just kinda arbitrarily said 10, and then there's supposed to be a Grand Theft Auto charge since the game sets you up to steal this helicopter at the end. I, however, accidentally blew it up, but we won't count that. A Home in the Hills sees CJ returning to Los Santos by storming Mad Dog's former mansion and reclaiming it from the drug dealer Big Papa. In that process, he would receive 52 murder charges for Papa's crew and 1 more for Papa himself. Plus, there would be property charges, but considering in this case those would have to come from Mad Dog himself, it seems unlikely, so we'll forget about them this time. But now Carl is back where it all began. Only a few more missions to go. Our first mission back in Los Santos is a crazy one on paper anyways. Vertical Bird sees CJ infiltrate a government aircraft carrier for another branch of the government, so exactly what the charges might be here are vague to say the least. However, at least 13 murder charges, but I'm not actually sure specifically how many people are aboard each spy ship, so it could be more. Then we have 7 charges of property damage, but I really feel like it would be a more severe charge if that property were government jets and or spy ships, but whatever. Oh, and I suppose CJ would also likely get a trespassing charge for this too, so... But now we begin the game's final stretch of missions, which are far more often than not just gang territory takeovers, with cutscenes before and after. The first, Homecoming, is exactly that. Head down to greet Sweet, back from prison, and then drive him to Grove Street where CJ has to take out 6 drug dealers and take back the neighborhood from the Ballas. So 6, plus the 3 to start the gang war, and then 22 during the actual wave-to-wave fighting, for a total of 31 murder charges. It's good to be home, I guess. Alright, so the next thing I did wasn't a mission, but I am going to count it because it's necessary to complete the game. The gang warfare. So, getting to the bare minimum of 35% of the territory under Grove control, from where the game puts you at the beginning of the Return to Los Santos section of the game, took me 16 gang fights. I did not include gangsters who were already present in an area when a gang war started, but who weren't included as part of the given waves. I only include the 3 necessary kills to start each fight, and then all the baddies killed during the fight, who are shown on the minimap. Here are how many kills I got in each. As you can see, it varies quite a bit with how many enemies the game spawns, and I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the actual territory being attacked or not. All of these murders will be counted towards Carl's total, and for each gang fight, remember 16, I will also tack on 1 property damage charge because lots of fences and cars were destroyed in the making of this footage. So a total of 386 murder charges from the gang fights alone, and 16 property damage charges. Nice. But we do still have a few more missions, and there's a chance I may have to do more gang fights in a bit, so we'll see. Anyways, next. Now, as far as I can tell, the only crimes in Cutthroat Business are reckless driving and I suppose, targeted harassment? I mean, CJ and Dog do chase Loke all around town, so I'm gonna put down a stalking charge even if we ultimately root against Loke as an audience. The next couple missions will be easy to sort though, since it's just me doing what I did a little while ago in the gang fights, but now in a mission. So, Beat Down on Beat Up sees us taking revenge on a character who made a brief appearance during the first Los Santos section of the game. But before we can confront him directly, we need to retake Glen Park for the second time, or in my case, third time. Between the Ballas in the gang fight and Dup's personal guard, CJ got another 39 murder charges, plus I'll throw in a property damage charge for the sake of consistency with the way that I scored the other gang fights. It's pretty much the same deal with the next one, Grove for Life, where CJ and Sweet have to take back 2 territories from the Ballas, again both of which I've already taken. So a total of 52 murders between the 2 locations, and 2 property damage charges for each neighborhood. The mission, Riot, is just a cutscene, so no crimes are committed during it, other than the crime of Frank Tenpenny going free. The penultimate mission, Los Desperados, is a fairly simple one to sort. It's just a short but very violent romp through some Vagos territory to reclaim the areas which used to belong to Caesar's gang. In the process, Carl gets 52 more murder charges, and again, being consistent, I would put property damage, but given that the riots have consumed the city by this point, I somehow doubt that anyone could ever know or distinguish the damage that Carl did from anyone else's. But here we are, the last mission, end of the line. Now, this one is a gauntlet of enemies. Carl has to climb 4 floors of Big Smoke's crack palace and take out numerous enemies, and then Smoke himself. Then, Tenpenny shows up, and he has to repeat the process going back down, but this time in the dark, and also the building is on fire. The final stretch is a chase around town, with CJ driving for the first half and shooting for the other. So in total, I counted 109 murders. It's not very surprising that the finale would have more kills than any other single mission, but yeah, over 100 in this mission alone easily. Again, it seems hard to put property damage crime to any of what CJ does, given what's going on around him, but I suppose he could be charged at least for destroying the fire truck. Actually, nah, that's Tenpenny's fault. Oh yeah, and I forgot about him. Technically speaking, it should be murder, but they didn't kill him directly, so I'm actually going to put it down as a negligent homicide. I'm sure there's some kind of irony there. Alright, now let's take a step back and look at an overview of just how many crimes CJ commits during your average GTA San Andreas playthrough, before taking into account players rampaging and other miscellaneous factors. So, I'm sure you're all wondering, after all is said and done, what do the totals look like? Well, lucky for you, I was just crazy enough to spend the time sorting it all out into a neat little chart. And by looking at it, we can learn some interesting things about the missions from Grand Theft Auto. Like, for example, that 11 of the game's 101 missions have no crimes in them whatsoever. Or that robbing Uncle Sam and breaking the bank at Caligula's were tied for the most different amount of crimes committed during a single mission. But that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear how many people did Carl kill. Well, before I reveal my more accurately calculated total, I wanted to glance at my estimate chart from back in the GTA biography days, and see how close I was. According to me, back then, my estimate for how many kills Carl got in the main story missions alone was 1,224. My high estimate for the number of deaths included guesses for all the side activities as well, but I did not have time to calculate all of that for this video. Maybe, if enough people like this one, I'll make that extended version. We'll see. Anyways, what is the final total after having manually counted all individual murders in a single playthrough of San Andreas? 1,440. So my original guess wasn't too far off, given the parameters, but still, let's just sit back and reckon with the fact that if Carl Johnson was a real person, he would easily be one of the single most terrifying human beings to have ever walked the planet. He single-handedly killed enough people to wipe a small town off the map. Absolute madness. What other tidbits can we learn about Carl looking at this data? Well, that he committed terrorism at least 4 times, as defined by, well, me, and that his second most prevalent crime after cold-blooded murder was the comparatively tame charge of property damage. Oh, and if you want to look at these charts yourself, I will be making them available to patrons for you data lovers out there. 52 different crimes across 101 story missions, plus the game's gang warfare mechanics. Some reference to California law where possible, but the occasional guess at what the charge would actually be, given that this is a video game. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see me cover the other GTA protagonists' crime lists in depth like this, then the best way to let me know is by signing up to my Patreon at patreon.com/thecriminalhistorian, where you can see all videos like this early, get access to original music made for my videos, and much more. I'll see you next time, folks. I hope you have yourself a wonderful evening. Bye-bye!